think what made the Yeezy stand out is that there was such an identifiable connection. You could see Kanye making this. Like, many of the people listening to this have seen the clip of you at Kanye's house, and he literally has rows and dozens of designs, and he's pointing you and showing them like, oh, hey, yeah, I was thinking about this one, I was thinking about that one. And none of those artists that I mentioned that partnered with Reebok, I can imagine them doing that with their Reebok shoes. I just can't, because it seemed more like a straight up endorsement as opposed to this broader vision. And I think that's one of the reasons why Yeezy worked so well. We saw Kanye struggling to try to get into fashion and, feeding these people in the back of limousines and all these ridiculous stuff, interning with Virgil at Fendi and stuff like that. Like, so we saw the journey, and there was a natural tie-in where the other ones felt like, yeah, it's cool to see Reebok in the mix, but it felt more like a check.
Yeah, and I think, Rick Ross and Cardi B have been pretty open about, in general, they will take the check. And Kanye, he has made and lost a lot of money, but you never got the sense that he was doing it for the money, right? Like, he was always losing money because he was spending so much on trying to perfect whatever it was that he was doing, including the shoes. And, he had the Yeezys with Nike first, and those were not like big money makers for him. But it laid the groundwork, right? And you could see him obsessing over that. And just like when I was out there in California with him, you could see him looking at those shoes like every single one of them was a child of his. I mean, it was like that level of passion and intensity and, perfectionism, and like, God, it would be, that seems like a lot to put on a child, but maybe on a shoe, it's fine,
Yeah. That really rang true, and I think worked with him in the product. And yeah, you're right. We know that Cardi B and Rick Ross, it's like, yeah, pay me the money and I'll do the thing, whether it's a feature, and feature can be anything, whether it's showing up for an event or doing this. And yeah, like it all works out. All these people make good money, but it's interesting because obviously as this continues, the 2010s go on, Reebok is kind of doing its thing. It's clearly middling along as Adidas is continuing to rise, and Adidas had a really strong 2010s thanks to Ye and thanks to the Ultra Boost and some of the other things they did. But by the time the pandemic comes around, Reebok is now looking to sell. And there's a few things in the mix. We saw a few entertainers getting involved. Master P, I talked to him on my podcast a couple years back when he was interested in the deal. And I know Shaq was one of the ones involved as well. And it's interesting with Shaq. And yeah, now I'd love to tap a little bit into him because he's such an interesting figure in all of this, because it's now 30 plus years that he's had some affiliation with this brand, but also just doing well in business.
Yeah, I mean, so ABG, who came in and bought Reebok, they're an immense licensing business, one of the biggest in the country, but in the world probably. But they started out, their founder was like, basically resuscitating dormant brands. That was his idea, and he started out mainly with, at least in the current iteration of ABG, with celebrity brands. So ABG still owns pieces of various celebrity estates, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, Muhammad Ali, in some cases, most of the estate. And it was all about sort of taking something dormant, or like, let's say, a brand that was not, producing any more content, to put it one way. I don't like that word usually, but if you're dead, you're probably not producing content unless somebody's producing it for you. But in finding the essence of it, right? Like something that could be marketable. So with Marilyn Monroe, it was Chanel No. 5. She wore Chanel No. 5. And so that was a great deal they could do with the, for the Marilyn Monroe estate. And the expertise that he gained, Jamie Salter is his name, the head of ABG, in sort of reviving these celebrity estates or extending them, he also applied to dormant brands. So he's got, I think, Airwalk and Nautica and all these other, the list goes on. Basically, if you imagine yourself in a mall in, 1995 and you think about the brands that are floating around, ABG owns like half of them.
Right.
And it's a licensing deal, right? They get them produced, they put the name on, they do the marketing, and that's that. And it's a great freaking business. And they are in business with Shaq. So some time ago, they paid, I think, like several $100 million to Shaq, much of it in ABG stock, to own something like half of the Shaq brand, so that basically, ABG gets paid when Shaq gets paid. And, I think that's part of the reason why you see him out in so many commercials. Like, he's got a really strong team kind of pushing that out. But he also got, because he had such a big amount of ABG stock that came back to him, I think he might be the largest individual shareholder besides Jamie Salter, the founder. He's very invested in, sort of being a part of these brands that they have in their portfolio. So, you see him pop up at like Sports Illustrated stuff. That's another ABG brand. You see him, with various titles at Reebok, right? That's an ABG brand. He is making himself wealthier as he makes these portfolio companies wealthier. And I think it's a pretty unique deal. But I think also just goes to show Shaq as sort of like an underrated businessman, making moves. And, of course, I think the deal does not include his DJ business and some of the other stuff that he does on the side, which was maybe part of the reason you see him out on the road, spinning on the decks there. And, but it does incentivize him to get really behind something like Reebok, which he does have this historical connection to. So, it's kind of funny how it comes full circle.
That's the fascinating thing about him, because you hear about the Google deal, you hear about some of the other things that he's been involved with, but this deal, which may be one of the most lucrative that he's involved with, doesn't get discussed as much. And I think it's because a lot of people just don't understand ABG's business and even his involvement with the business. And even though Shaq himself was rumored to be involved with this group with him and Master P and Baron Davis that were part of the buying group that was trying to directly get the Reebok brand, he ended up with so much stake in the Reebok brand as well through the ABG.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason people don't talk about ABG that much is because it is, by nature, like a background operator type of thing. It's not a brand in itself. It owns brands. And so, and I think that's kind of by design. It's the brands that get the shine, and not ABG. But, if you know. And now you see sort of like how Shaq is connected to, all these dots together.
And with that, Reebok does fit within that house in a lot of ways. You mentioned several of the brands. Reebok is one of those brands. So I'm interested to see how the brand's likeness and how things like that do get to be both beneficial for ABG, but how they get to continue the brand on. And one of the things we've seen, at least this past year, I think it was only a couple months ago, but they announced that both Shaq and Allen Iverson, the two most famous NBA partnerships that they've had, are now both executives for Reebok's basketball operations, which is pretty cool to see. Thanks for watching Trapital on YouTube. If you enjoyed this clip, please make sure to check out the full episode that's available on our channel. And while you're at it, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get all the updates on all the clips, videos, and breakdowns that we have on Trapital.